Gluten-free, coast to coast with Jess and Nick. Welcome to our mini-series. So, starting with today's episode, we're going to do 3 episodes as part of this sort of topic. And then from there, we've got lots of ideas about what we want to be doing, lots of experiences to share. So, we've got all sorts of stuff to cover, but this first series, we're going to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly of living gluten-free. Today, we're going to start with the bad, though, because we figured we'd kick it off with some of the weird and bummer situations we've been in. We'll talk a little bit about why it's good to talk about that in a minute, but we wanted to start with that so we could end with, we've also had a lot of good experiences. And the ugly part being like, so yeah, you're gluten-free and you're gonna have to tell people often, and how you do that.
Well, and I think it's good that we're starting off with the bad first, because I've never known someone to go gluten-free and have like a great experience to start.
Right.
Like, I guess this can kind of like go into our first topic, but like it's, but like, I don't know, like when I was first gluten-free, when I was first diagnosed gluten-free, I was not the best with it. You know, I remember I was like a moody teen again. And
again, you were
I was 17 turning 18.
Yeah.
And I was just super bummed out about the whole thing. You know, at that point in my life, a lot of like my friendships and stuff were like, oh, let's go out to eat, or let's go out to like McDonald's. And
right. So like that freedom of being a teenager.
Oh yeah. So I don't know anyone who started off great. So I think it's good that we're starting off with the bads to kind of be like, look, this is how you at least got to start off celiac.
Yeah. And I think and hopefully we'll do a whole thing on our like celiac journeys each. But for me, I definitely had it easier because you had already done it. But there's still like those going out to eat things that are just unavoidable, no matter how long your family's been gluten-free, no matter how long like you've had celiac, it's unavoidable. And I think it's really important to talk about because there's this pressure to live like a perfect gluten-free life. And I was actually sent to like gluten-free boot camp at Beth Israel in Boston by my gastroenterologist. And it's wicked cutthroat, and she was lovely. But it sucked because Lucky Charms had just been made gluten-free. And she was like, oh, you can't have those anymore. They're like kind of gluten-free. I was like, listen, lady, the box says gluten-free. I'm going to eat them.
Well, and I'm not going to lie. When you were diagnosed gluten-free, I was so upset because, I mean, also upset for you, but like, yeah. I remember you went to like Wegmans or something and was like, oh, look at all the gluten-free, like mozzarella sticks, like all this stuff. And I remember the first cookies I ever made literally like crumbled in my hand. You know, it was like the first thing I ever had gluten-free just like fell apart. Bread was awful then. And it was crazy because it was only like 2 or 3 years.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, there's not a huge time difference between you being diagnosed and me.
No, but I feel like food really advanced, or at least that was just my own perception. Like I thought
no, it did so very quick. Well, because that's where like all of this started for me. Because when you were gluten-free, it was like there was nothing available, so I like made you Pop-Tarts, and then like all of a sudden there were Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, I remember like the first time I had a gluten-free donut, like those things, like anytime I go home and mom has gluten-free donuts for me, I rip those things apart, you know, because it's something that like I'm not like, I didn't go out and have donuts all the time, but it was something that like was taken from me. And I feel like I didn't have it for a very long time. But like, again, going back to you, like when you were diagnosed gluten-free, like, yeah, being diagnosed gluten-free sucks, but like, I think there was just more out there, and we were also just more knowledgeable about where to find it too. Like we knew what to look for at grocery stores, and that it's not necessarily like, for me, a big thing is like, it doesn't have to say gluten-free on it.
Yeah.
Gluten-free. So. Right.
Well, yeah. And I think that'll be a cool thing to talk about too. Like finding your comfort level with what you will eat, because everybody is sort of different, but I think we're on the same page where if it says like, or actually I'm curious about yours, if it says processed in a facility of wheat, will you eat it?
Yes, only because that started when I was young, and I was just, again, super upset about everything. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just processed. It doesn't actually have it. And so I'd eat it anyway. And I don't know if that, like, because you don't really build up tolerance to gluten. Like, that's not a thing.
No.
But I just, like, it didn't affect me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to continue to do this until one day it affects me, which I guess
Well,
isn't, like, the smartest way to live. But
no, well, disclaimer, eat at your own risk always. Um, but my thing is, I'm going to assume that the factory people cleaned the machine. Like, I'm sure there's a checklist that they have
well,
to, like, at least spray it with water.
yeah, like, I'm not like a factory worker, but like if you're putting one thing on one belt and like I imagine other things are on another belt, so just like in the air, which I don't know,
I don't
that's
know.
not enough gluten for me.
Yeah, I like to trust the system if there's no gluten free. But anyways, so there's lots of things to explore. That I guess that's sort of an intro to gluten free coast to coast. We've got a lot of stuff where we want to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Being gluten free for 5 years and 8 years.
Oh goodness,
Do the
it
math.
was 2012, so 9 years.
9 years?
Well, gonna be 9 years in like June.
Were you June?
Yeah, and it was so funny. Like I remember the date specifically when I was told because I went to like someone's birthday party that day.
Oh.
And I remember being like, oh, bummer. Let's go to this birthday party. So like I
Yeah.
always had like because like Facebook photos of like I always see them and I'm like, oh, that was the day I was diagnosed gluten free.
Oh,
But I didn't know what it meant then. Like I didn't
right.
start being gluten free for like a little bit after that. But
No, because we went to Philadelphia.
we did, and I had lots of Philly cheesesteaks that were
Yeah.
not gluten free. Oh, and that's the thing too. They were like, I didn't dive right into it because again, I didn't want to. I didn't want to be gluten free. So I took my time getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's part of people's journey too is like, do you just go cold turkey? Like I did because I was so sick.
yeah, I mean,
But you
that's the
weren't
thing. I had like
symptomatic.
no true symptoms of celiac.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
you showed symptoms like immediately. I could have had it for years and no one would have known. I mean, I looked malnourished. I did not look healthy, but
Right.
um, you
No,
know,
I feel like I was sick with it for like a month, maybe like three, like September to December.
yeah,
And then they're like, ooh, this is not normal. They thought I had the flu.
yeah,
And the second I started describing it, the nurse practitioner, whoever I saw, like started taking her mask off because they thought it was during flu season. And they're like, you don't have the flu. I'm like, no, I know I don't have the flu. You don't like throw up after eating only English muffins if you have the flu.
you start us off. Like, what do you consider a bad experience, and like, what are the times you remember having bad experiences being gluten free?
Yeah. So I, the ones I've sort of like thought of to share today, there's two categories. Times where like it emotionally sucked to be gluten free and like out to eat, and then times where I was like physically sick because of eating out. Um, and I picked those two sort of categories because one of them was an example of like I did everything I could and the waitress was like so pumped on like how I could eat whatever I want. And then I spent the rest of the day in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't even good. So the last time that I was at Disney, so we go to Disney a lot. We'll do a whole episode on that. But
And because they really usually hook it up, but
so they usually hook it
yeah.
up. And I'm like sitting there being like, guys, this is like why we go here. It's so great. And we were at a restaurant we hadn't been to before. And they were so pumped to like get me whatever I want. And we'd been like watching all these like Disney bloggers who loved it there too. And they're not gluten free, but like I was pumped about it. And I had a couple options, but they're like, oh, you can have the lobster bisque. I'm like, sold. Haven't had that in a million years. I want it. Ate it. Whatever. Honestly, I don't know what made me sick. And then I had like fish tacos, which I'm not even sure I've ever eaten in real life.
Mm-mm.
But I was like, ooh, this is like fun and different, and who cares? I'm like 90% sure it was just like on a straight flour tortilla.
Well, yeah,
So
like that's something too that like I think like anytime I hear tacos, in my head I assume, oh, tacos are corn tortillas.
yeah,
And I think that goes like with just bad experiences in general, and more of an emotional thing is like, one thing that we're going to bring up is our trip to Oklahoma, where like just bringing it up to people at restaurants, like, it's so tough because like, I hate
Yeah.
being the reason that someone like, had to go out of their way or something like that. I hate being the fuss. So we
Mm-hmm.
were in Oklahoma though. We went and, they didn't, we said gluten and they looked at us like they'd never heard the word before. Like we were speaking a different language. And
Yeah.
then at that point we just got like super nervous.
Well,
Uh,
it started, if you remember, so we were driving from Maine to California,
yeah.
and I don't even remember what we ate in Pennsylvania, but that was one stop. And then we had a really good meal in Nashville, and that restaurant is no longer with us, but it was like farm to table, 100% gluten free. So good. Um, and then we like didn't eat again until Arizona, which we'll get to on a different episode because that was good.
That was really
Um, but like Tennessee to Arizona is like a really big space. And there was nothing. And so, anyways, we get to the hotel in Oklahoma. It was like the one hotel we splurged on because we're like, it's going to be a really long stretch. We stayed at like
it
this
was a casino, right?
casino. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like right on the border. And because we have a picture of you and I, which we should insert here. So we get to this nice hotel. I remember calling from our room down to the restaurant, being like, "Do you guys have gluten free?" And they're like, "I don't know." And they like put me on hold. And like we don't have a choice. We're nowhere. Like there's just fields around us, and then this casino. So we go down, and we end up like you can always like sort of play it safe with like meat,
Meat
like
products, yeah.
yeah, because sauces are gonna be potentially gluten filled, but like it's just your best bet. So, did we get the same thing?
I think we went with the ribs just because we're like, oh, like it's ribs and barbecue sauce.
And they did confirm that the barbecue sauce was gluten free.
Yeah, after like a couple of checks though, I don't think it didn't go smooth.
No, it did not go smooth. Like I think they came back a couple times. But so then, like you were saying, Nick, like we were like we have a gluten allergy, and they're like, I don't know what that is, and I'm like, literally, we're surrounded by wheat fields. Like, what
Yeah.
don't you like? I don't understand. And so then eventually we end up saying we have a wheat allergy,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still like, sure. Which like functionally I don't recommend saying you have a wheat allergy, but sometimes it just sends the message. They're like, do you want me to go into anaphylactic shock? I won't, but you don't need to know that. Um, and here's the thing: they bring us out our ribs, and there's a dinner roll
Yeah.
on it, and it was
100% gluten.
100% definitely not a gluten-free roll, 100% gluten on it. And it was just blew our mind, like the effort we went to be like, I've got a wheat allergy, and they bring it out. Because then I speak for myself, but like I was a wreck after that. Like,
Yeah.
why not know you didn't just like put it anywhere else? Like if you put something I told you I was anaphylactically allergic to make them listen to us on our plate, like what?
Well, and that goes back to like the whole my belief on corn tortillas is like
Yeah.
I just assumed, all right, it's fine, right? Like they said the ribs are gluten free.
Mm-hmm.
Now I, assume that when I say I'm gluten free, they're not going to put gluten all over my plate after they make sure the meal is. So that's just one of the bads for me is like, I think I assume too much, and because I don't want to make a fuss. And like, even I think in Oklahoma, like you did 90% of the talking,
Mm-hmm.
it was something that I wasn't a fan of. Like I hate doing it. Um,
Oh yeah.
but
Well,
I've gotten better with time too. But like the first part of about like being gluten free is like, it's their job at restaurants to make sure you're fed.
right.
And you need to know that, but it's still tough for you to like get over that. And especially like in places like Oklahoma where, you say gluten and they have no clue what that even means.
Right. Which, I don't understand. It's not like it's celiac is like a regional disease.
Yeah.
Like it's across the country. So that was super weird. So yeah, Oklahoma, that specific restaurant in Oklahoma, I don't want to say the state of Oklahoma was no good. Um, very pretty to drive through. Um, and then yeah, that restaurant at Disney just wrecked me. And that one sucked physically and emotionally because it was our first day there and I was so pumped to
Well,
be like at a safe place.
yeah, and Disney is so good with it. Like they'll come out and like they'll help you out so well, and like for them then to not deliver, like that's tough.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm like stuck. Like if I knew what it was, maybe I would feel better about it. But like I had Ryan like touching the tortilla. I'm like, you know what real tortillas feel
Yeah.
like? Does this feel like it's got gluten in it? We
Well,
both
that
are like, oh, could be like because there are good gluten-free or like wraps.
yeah. Well, and that kind of is another one of my bads though, is where like I've been served pizza, and I don't know if like you can do this. I don't even know if it's real or it's just all in my head. Where like I can see something and like
Yeah.
that's a gluten.
Yeah.
So like we were at La
Yes.
Festa, which is one of my favorite pizza places in Dover. They
Yeah.
really help out the gluten-free people. And this
Definitely.
dude walks out with a pizza, and I'm just like, that's not for me. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, like that. This is a gluten pizza. Sorry, like it's stuff like because restaurants, they do what they can, and they just
Right.
messed up. Which also another time,
I
and
was
you
gonna say,
guys,
did you eat that La Festa pizza, or
no,
did
I
they serve it
didn't
to you
eat
and you
that one.
didn't?
I caught that one before, but it was just like the look of it. Like there's a look between gluten and gluten free.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
but the one time I missed it is, and you actually brought this up the other day when we were talking about this.
So this one's crazy to me.
Yeah, so I'm on set. We're filming all the time at this one restaurant. We go there like we've probably been like 4 times at this point. We always eat there, and I'm always like, "Hey, I'll take the gluten-free pizza." And they say, "Sure thing, pal." They bring me out a pizza and say, "This is gluten-free." I give it the once over. I'm like, "Are you sure?" They go, "Yeah, yeah, this is it." I eat the whole thing there, and like half my crew hasn't been served yet. I'm like,
Mhm.
that's crazy, but like I'm gonna go. Um, I was like, I found out that like they served someone else my gluten-free pizza after I left. So I had eaten like a whole gluten-free or a whole gluten pizza.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and then I had to drive in LA traffic to my home. And like the whole time I was sweating it out because I was like, I could explode right here in my car on the 101.
Did you feel sick driving home, or was it like had somebody texted you and said like, "Hey, we just found out you got the wrong pizza"?
What's funny is, and I know you do this too, but it's like a phantom sickness
A
where
1000%.
for some reason I don't think I got sick, and I ate a whole pizza. Like I should have been like vomiting everywhere, right? Or
Right.
whatever.
No, that would be me.
Yeah, I don't throw up. It comes out the other end. Uh, but it was
So
yeah, I remember just like sweating it out and like being sick to my stomach, almost like being like, oh, I'm sick. Like I have to be sick.
I have to be sick. Yeah.
But I wasn't. I didn't feel sick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it was really weird. But like, and again, like it's just one of those things where, like, you go out to eat and they're like, oh yeah, here you go. Here's your
Yeah.
pizza.
Well, so this summer, I think we were out at a place in Portsmouth, and they've been pretty good to me. And so we were getting breakfast, and they're like talking about their gluten-free menu, and this should have been a hint, but like I've eaten there before, and they've been really good to me. But um, they're like, "Oh, we've got gluten-free pancakes." I'm like, "What?" Like I can? They don't ever make gluten-free pancakes.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
Yeah, and the waitress was like, "Yeah, and the owner's here, so like he won't even mind making it for you." And I was like, "Okay, so there's like some messaging there. Like if the owner wasn't here, would they mind making this for me? Like what?" Um, so I was like, "Whatever." I'm so excited, and I took like a selfie to show somebody, like, "Look at me having fun at breakfast." Right before, and then I want to get to the punchline. So the food comes out and it's these like huge pancakes and they look gluten free, like there's holes in them and stuff, um, but there's crumbs on it, like burnt crisps. And I was like, I don't know, like it doesn't seem good if you were making it on a clean, like gluten-free pancake batter on a clean skillet, like you should have, because he knew it was an
Mhm.
allergy. um there wouldn't be crumbs on it, like that doesn't make sense. But I'm like, who? And this goes back to like the emotional piece. Like, I'm not sending my pancakes back because there's burnt crumbs on my pancake. Like, I just, I mean, silly me, I clearly should have,
Yeah.
because I knew they didn't use a clean skillet and I ate it anyways. I didn't finish it because I was making myself so anxious eating it anyways. Like, I got so worked up about it. And then I've got a fun cycle. Like 2 hours later, I was like violently ill for the rest of the day. And that one's just such a crappy one because I was mentally like, I can't send this back, which of course you can. Advocate for yourself. People, be stronger than me in that moment, because I was like, no, you did this on a dirty skillet.
Well, and that's probably like the worst bad for me is like the sticking up for yourself part.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, I work on set and we get fed all the time and they're just like, oh, sorry, there's no gluten-free here. Or like, they give me zero options to eat. Or even if it's something like that, where, I mean, that's happened to me too, where like I was at a pizza place once and I saw them use one knife to cut a regular pizza and then the same knife to cut my pizza. I should have asked for a new pizza, but I'm like, oh, I'm not going to fuss,
Yeah. But that's what sucks, because then like we get sick.
Yeah. And, I mean, you and I have much different, symptoms, but it's the same thing. Like I hate making the fuss. I hate putting up a stink about it. And to me, that's the worst part. It's not necessarily like the times where, I was at Cheesecake Factory with, some friends, and like I had my buddy, like he was driving me back. I had him like pull over at like a gas station. I had to run inside because I was getting sick.
Yeah.
It's not those ones that really like, because to me, like, you also got to eat at your own risk. Like I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in food places, whatever. I know how safe they're being, and I know how like dirty kitchens can be. Not like dirty with dirt, but like
like cross contamination is always a risk.
Oh yeah, so like I go out knowing that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's to me, it's the when I do catch something like that, it's
don't say something.
Yeah, like that's the hardest part to me.
Yeah,
and it still is. That's why like I have a couple places out here I go to in LA that like I know I won't get sick from.
Yeah.
There's this one place, it was like some of the best tacos I ever had, but I was super sick. And I didn't check what the tacos actually were. It's just like, oh, the taco with like some cheese and tortilla. I'm like, oh, right. Sounds great. But I didn't ask, so it's on me.
Well, so I got sushi downtown maybe over this summer. I don't know. And I did so much research so that I could just go in with my friends and be like, I want this sushi. And I'm like reading the menu because like, if it's like tempura, like you can't have that. Or if there's, certain crunchy things, like I know what I can't have. And so I like and this is again, advocate for yourself. And if you don't know, you're not alone if you hate doing it. They brought it out to me and I was eating it and I'm like, oh, this is crunchy. And I like brought it up to the waiter and he got really mad at me because in a sense, like rightfully so, because I didn't say I have a gluten allergy. I just went, I know that I can have like the spicy tuna, I can have the Alaska roll, and then some like other white fish roll. And it doesn't say fried or Crispies or like anything.
Yeah.
And that's like, if I had just been like, hey, because then what happened is we're like gonna go out. Well, then it must not have been this summer because COVID. Summer before that, because then we're gonna go to a bar after that, and I was so anxious for the rest of the night, like waiting to get sick from the sushi. And first of all, it was delicious, so it really sucked. And they did remake it for me, which was very nice because they didn't have to. But yeah, just another one of those times where like it would have just been easier to be like, I have celiac disease. Please don't serve me gluten.
Yeah, and I bring this one up all the time, but like when I was in college, basically, like they fed me gluten-free meals every meal, which is great. But it got to the point I was eating like the same thing every other night. Yeah. And I didn't like it.
Salmon, right?
Yeah, it was salmon. I had salmon like 3-4 times a week. Mm-hmm. And it's just because they always had it, which is kind of weird too. But they knew I wouldn't say no. right? So it's super easy for them. They just throw it on a plate, call it good. And I ate salmon a lot because I didn't like speak up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it honestly wasn't until our mom like emailed the head chef, because we were all super close, that they're like, oh yeah, like my son doesn't want to eat salmon every day. And after that day, I didn't eat salmon again, and I didn't have probably the same meal more than like once a week. So like, you just gotta like speak up for yourself, even though it's super tough, and I get it, but like,
Right.
you gotta
Well,
do
that's why it's important, and that's why we're talking about it, because like you've had, I mean, you were 20, like you're an adult at that point during this thing at college, and
it. Mm-hmm.
you had celiac for like 2 or 3 years. So like it wasn't new, you weren't a kid, and it still sucked. And these are people who were telling you like, hey, if you just like call ahead, we'll have a pizza ready for you.
Yeah, I
And
never
it's
once
still
called ahead.
hard.
They told me that like day one, like, oh, just call ahead and we'll make you whatever. And I
Yeah.
never did that. I just, whatever they had when I showed up for 4 years is what I had.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they have like the head chef comes out and like takes care of me.
Yeah.
So
The
like
Christian, is that his name?
Christian, yeah, he was well, he
Yeah.
was like the head chef.
Yeah.
Each shift had their own head chef, and like they knew me as soon as I showed up. They'd be like, all right, like this is what we got for you. They'd give me my options. But you know, it's tough because like, again, they were clearly doing something else. Their job isn't to wait around for me. So that's why I always felt like I couldn't say no to what they're offering.
Right. But like that's the mindset that's challenging. Is like they are there to feed you. Like you paid a lot of money for that room and board.
Yeah, well, and it's literally like their job to make sure I'm fed. Like it's their job to do a whole
Yeah.
bunch of stuff, but like at the end of the day, when it comes to me, I have to be like, look, they're there to
Mm-hmm.
feed me. And the things, I waited in line with other gluten-free people who would be like, yeah, I don't want that. Make me this. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, how could you? But that's what they did. Like that's what you have to do. You have to
I
speak up.
respect that so much. And I will say, like, more recently, I've gotten better about it. And I think we'll talk more about that in like the ugly
Mm-hmm.
podcast episode, in the ugly episode, because I do have some like stuff that I've learned that has made it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, because there was a local pizza place, and this was recently. I can't remember if it was pre-COVID, but I'd never been before, and my friends, we go to trivia on Wednesdays, and I knew that they were good to me for gluten free, but we were just like getting something before we went to trivia, and I'd never been, and I was like, "You're gonna be brave, and you're gonna go to this place you've never been to before," and like didn't research extensively, so I show up, and there's looking at the menu, and I want to say they had a gluten-free pizza, and luckily like I wasn't like friends with the waitress, but she went to trade, so like 6 degrees of kittery, um or she's just a really nice, I think we can just go, she's like a nice person, but she was like, so like how sensitive are you? And I was like, well, I've got celiac disease,
Most
so like
sensitive.
I'm pretty sensitive. Like you won't be here in 2 hours when it shows, but like no thank you. And she's like, okay, like I just want to let you know, like I wouldn't really recommend you eating this pizza. And I was like, okay. I actually, and like I wasn't hurt or mad or anything. I was actually like really grateful that she was really
Yeah.
honest about it. So then I like start going back to like old tricks I learned when I was first diagnosed. Like you can always get like a burger without a bun, or you can, like there's always salad,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So different.
Well, that's another thing I was just gonna say real quick. Like when I'm on
Yeah.
set, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go here." Like they don't really check to see if there's food for me because they have to feed like 20 other people.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, like there's always a salad. So anytime we travel to Washington D.C. for work, I eat Caesar salads without croutons probably like 6 times while I'm there.
Which is crazy because Caesar salad is just like lettuce with dressing,
Oh well,
with when there's no croutons.
yeah, and I make them pay for the chicken. My salad ends up being like $18.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, oh yeah, get the grilled chicken on it, please, because like you brought me to a place I can't eat anything, so
Yeah.
you're gonna pay that upcharge.
Right. Well, and so that's like when I was at this pizza place, I'm like, first of all, I have like never not like walked out of a restaurant because there's nothing for me to eat. So I'm like, I'm gonna be flexible. My friends are here. And so I was like, I'll get like this like California chicken sandwich, which was like avocado and chicken and cheese and like lettuce, just without the bun. Like that'd be great. I she's like, okay. And she goes back to the kitchen, which is an open kitchen in a small restaurant, and starts talking to them. And again, I can be very clear about this. She was an absolute angel through the duration of this, because the guys in the back start like, railing on her for like trying to help me. And again, they're like maybe 50 feet from me. Like I can hear the whole thing happening. Where they're talking about how like, no, she can't have that because it's all cooked in the same like convection oven. And it's gonna like blow all the gluten everywhere. And like no one was willing to like put the chicken in a skillet to like melt the cheese on top. Um, and they just kept every idea I came up with. 3 different times I tried to order, and they're like, no, that won't work.
Yeah.
I ended up leaving, and I've never, but like they were sending me such a clear message of like, we don't want to help you. That I don't know if that probably is what made it easier, because it's the place like at Disney where they're like, oh, you can have whatever you want. How exciting. Bamboozled. But that place, they're like, no, we won't even put this in, like go one step further to help you. Like they were not interested. So I met them at Trivia, where Main Beer Cafe, where they're always good to me and make me the best gluten-free pizza. We'll save that one for the good though.
Like this, I think it ties in really well with, probably the most important piece of it is, so like after you couldn't eat and you were super bummed out and, or after times you've been sick, like how do you deal with it? Not only physically, but more emotionally, because like, Disney, you were bamboozled. You were, you walked into this restaurant and these people didn't want to help you. So like what tips do you have to get over that kind of stuff?
Right. Well, I think it's important to have people to talk to about it. I have friends that, really get it on a level of like, they're going to hold my hair back kind of level. And there's friends who, let me pick the restaurant that we're eating at, which talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Pressure, don't love always having to pick, but I'm grateful, whatever. Um, but from like my therapy work, we always talk about like riding the wave. Like, you've got to let yourself be mad that like this is what your life is, and you don't sit in that madness forever, right? Like a wave doesn't stay at its peak forever. That's the idea, right? Like we're gonna feel really angry, and like the amount of times I've like power cried over not being able to participate in something, or like having to walk out of a restaurant at dinner with, because I was like, oh, I finished my free water, I'm out of here. um but so like to just be angry, because the more we try and like justify other people's behavior, right? Like that pizza place like was not cool, or like the guy at the sushi restaurant like getting mad at me. Um, I just don't. I don't know. We don't have to pretend like that's not real. Like celiac takes the freedom and the spontaneity away from eating out, and there is true anxiety. Like I don't know if I've ever, and I'm happy to hear you have, Nick, met somebody with celiac who's like, I'm just gonna like tell you what I need. Like everybody feels nervous about being like, hey, so I've got celiac, like maybe don't give me gluten because I have other plans today.
Yeah. Well, for me, like there's two big ones, and you mentioned one of them was really that like, I have a really good group of friends back home.
Yeah.
And I do out here too, not just back home, but like I was first diagnosed and have most of my celiac life has been back home with these friends. They knew almost just as much as I did about it, because they were such good friends. And, so like they'd take me to McDonald's with them every time we went. And they're like, look, it's McDonald's, Nick, you're fine. You just won't eat here. Like, it's probably better for you. You're not eating McDonald's. But then like when we'd go out to eat, we'd have like to real restaurants, they'd make sure there was food for me, or they'd be the first to ask, like, do you have a gluten-free menu? Because that's something I hate doing too. And they're like, oh, do you have a gluten-free menu for him? I'm like, oh, thanks guys. So that one's really important to me, is like, make sure you have someone to talk about, and also like have people there who at least understand what you're going through. Like none of my friends are celiac. None of my friends have allergies that make it really difficult for them to eat out or just eat in general. But they get it, and they are there to help. But another one is, and this is for like new celiac people, I suppose, is the term I want to go with. They one tip I got that really helped me is like when I was first diagnosed, it sucks, right? Basically, I mean, after you and I kind of wish I was gluten free my whole life, because when you go 18 years, 18 plus for you, and then every food you've ever loved is like taken from you,
yeah,
you get pretty moody. And like I was probably not like a cool dude to hang around. But so the best advice I got was let yourself be angry for X amount of time. So give yourself, for me, it was 2 months. Give myself 2 months to just, complain every day about it, to be the worst, to hate gluten-free everything. And then after that, like you're done. You don't get any more time. You just kind of, it's tough. But in those 2 months, you learn how to be gluten-free. You learn how to, deal with it. And that was just something that like really helped me. Is you got to give yourself a time frame to be upset, because it is upsetting.
yeah. And so a time frame, but like a timeline of like, this is my life now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have to give yourself time. And I remember that video that you saw, like to mourn the like it's grief. You have to grieve the fact that like I have to carry snacks in my car with me because I won't be able to stop on a long drive as easily. Can you? For sure. And we have a lot to share on that. But having to be prepared. I went to a Christmas party at an old employer that an old employer I worked for was having, and I had to bring my own dinner to the Christmas party because they're like, oh, sorry. Was my macaroni grilled delicious? Yes, but like I was the only one eating out of takeout. Um, so you can grieve that, and I, my grief lasted a lot longer than 2 months. I would say I was diagnosed in November, and at first I was fine because for a long time I carried a lot of guilt that like you had celiac and I didn't, even though I knew I had the gene.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always like, oh, I just wish I had it, so like you wouldn't have to do it alone. And then I got it and I'm like, this is terrible, like I'm gonna be sick forever. It was easier for me to go gluten free because I was so sick, that I was like, yeah, whatever, to like stop this pain. So I think at first I was like, yeah, this is fine, because I was diagnosed in January, and I would say it was spring before it wasn't always on my mind, like something I was always thinking about, but like that passes.
Well, because there's also a time like for you, first of all, to be angry, but for you then to like this is your life now, where instead of being like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I can't eat that, I can't just go out to a fast food restaurant anymore, you have to, like, it comes to a point where it's second nature, and
Yes.
that isn't right away. So like you basically have like two periods. One where you complain, and if you want to eat gluten, I used to call them YOLO nights, where all my buddies they'd cook a pizza at like midnight, and we'd
Yeah.
watch a movie and eat pizza. And I'm like, well, I'll just eat a pizza and it'll knock me out, so I'll just go to sleep and wake up fine. I couldn't do that anymore. That was still like when my stomach was healing, so
Mhm.
it was not like an ideal thing. But
Yeah,
that was
would
my
not
time.
recommend.
No, definitely don't do that. But
But pacing yourself, like cold
yeah,
turkey is not for everybody.
no, cold turkey is not for everyone. And then also just like letting it be your life is the next step. Is just kind of like letting it be there. So, I mean, those are like the three things that you get from this: is give yourself time to be upset, give yourself time to realize that like this is your life, and also like surround yourself with people who get it.
Yeah. And we're here if you can't find those people. That's a lot of what we're doing with Nick's
Yeah.
Gluten Free Kitchen is, I was just talking on somebody with Instagram yesterday that they were like, I only know one other gluten free person on the seacoast. And I'm like, well, I know one gluten free or celiac, on the seacoast, and I don't think it's the same person. So there's four of us out there who don't know each other.
Yeah.
And there is something really unique and honestly isolating about having celiac as a whole. Um, and to have other people who know it, like, yes, Nick and I we've got friends who get it, and Ryan, of course, is really good at it. Um, but there are times where you're in your car angry alone, or I'm in my car crying, like, okay, I mean, still, and it's
That
been,
reminds me. So I'd been gluten free probably for like gosh, almost 4 years at this point. We were driving cross country, and we just stopped like a gas station to pick up like snacks. And I was like, oh, beef jerky, nailed it. I get in the car, and it says like gluten right on the package. And I remember, because look, this was like day 4. I just wanted to get to LA.
Yeah.
I was stressing out in the car, and I'm sure Jess was sitting there like, bro, chill out. Like, you did it to yourself. You didn't read it. But I remember just being upset. Like,
oh, that's the worst, because I've had that happen to me a couple times recently, and I wish I could remember, but I'm like, I'd get home and be like, oh, nope, I can't eat this. Cool.
Oh, I've gotten like stuff from like the grocery store, and I think it's one thing, and then I bring it home. I'm like, oh, roommate, you have more food.
Yeah. Well, there was one in reference to like crying in your car. I used to work at Shriners Hospital, which is like the most magical place on earth for social workers in the medical field. It was the best, and like a really diverse community, and it was really cool. So they had like basically like a potluck, which is like every celiac's nightmare, because everyone put their heart and soul into their dishes, and you have to be like, oh, can't eat that because I don't know if you used a wooden spoon or not. And I walked in there and I couldn't eat anything. This was in like the first 5 months of my diagnosis. I would maybe be more comfortable now. But I had just been diagnosed, and I like don't even have the words to tell you how much I loved working at Shriners. And I'm like, what a beautiful event this is, just because, like people come from all over the world to get treatment at Shriners. So like families who had been at Shriners for like a while for their treatment, they made stuff, and like there was like all these countries represented. And that is where I learned about crying up. And that's where you put your head back so your tears don't fall down your face. Because you have to still be in this social situation. But I ended up having to go back to my office and cry. Yeah. Because it was just this like that I was still grieving. And I'm like in this just like beautiful setting with all of these like people coming together. And remind you, like Shriners, like in and amongst people's tragedies, they like made these like beautiful meals. And yeah, you just gotta cry sometimes. And that's okay, right? That, like I said about riding the wave, like it doesn't mean we cry forever. It doesn't mean that we sit in that anger forever. But a lot of the work I do with kids is like, you want to push that anxiety, that sadness, that grief, that anger down, do it. But you're going to go home and you're going to yell at your boyfriend because he didn't put the dishes away, when really you're just upset that you missed out on this cool party.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like, I don't know, to wrap it all up too, like you be a fuss, right? Make a fuss at restaurants, but also like it's your life now. So you have to learn to deal with it in ways that help you deal with it. So, if it's crying in your office or crying in your car.
Crying up. Put your head back.
Crying up, yeah. Or, whatever it may be, like you need to find what helps you. So like, I hope our tips can help you deal with your celiac.
And just validate it, right? Like, I hope you heard something that you related to, that you've been in similar situations, that if you get gluten, if you don't advocate for yourself, that you are not a bad person, that you are not bad at having celiac disease. There is a lot of pressure to live a perfect gluten-free life, right? Like I got sent to gluten-free boot camp. It's just, it's your life. The fact that you live your entire life without making a mistake it's not realistic. So have grace with yourself as you sort of like stumble through all this, and that you're not alone. Because look, we just talked for an hour about how many different ways we messed it up.
Well, it was honestly too, I think we skipped a lot of like the bad incidences we've had, like we could have talked for a very long time about like the troublesome part of celiac. But we'll talk more about it. I'm sure with the ugly comes around, even with the good, like, sometimes like if things go bad one time doesn't mean they are bad the next time. I've had that happen before with restaurants. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. You can tell we're coast to coast because it's nighttime now where I live, if you're watching us.
I know it is
on YouTube.
4 o'clock and very sunny here.
But so next episode, we're going to talk about the good. So the times where we ate out and it was amazing. The times where people really came through for us. All the
The time
good
where
parts.
grocery stores gave us really good food too.
When I
I
cried
love
in
finding.
Wegmans. Yeah.
Yeah, I love finding good food at grocery stores.
Yeah, it's the best. Gluten-free Oreos.
Oh goodness, yeah, I'll cry next time I see those at a grocery store.
So we've got some good stuff to share. Not being sick. That's a good one. So we'll be back. Thanks for hanging out and listening to Gluten Free Coast to Coast with Jess and Nick.